There's an African proverb that says, until the lioness tells her side of the story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. This African proverb speaks of the power of the pen, the power of the storyteller or the narrator. The one given the privilege or who takes the privilege to narrate biblical stories are powerful as they can put words in the mouth of God, choose when women speak or not speak, gloss over the mistreatment and the oppression of women, introduce and depict women in a way that leads the reader to believe that they are deserving of the violence and the oppression that befalls them at the hands of men or at the hands of God. The narrator has a whole lot of power. I've heard the story of David's abuse of power against first Bathsheba told in different ways. Even in my very own Zondervan King James Version of the Bible, at the top where it tries to tell you what the story is about, it says that David commits adultery with Bathsheba. That he simply commits adultery with Bathsheba, which almost gives Bathsheba partial blame for David's abuse of power, which we know is what? A lie. In fact, if you look at this entire passage that we just read, these 5 verses that are filled with sexual violence, if you look at it, Bathsheba never speaks because the narrator takes privilege to take her voice. She is named, she is identified the way they want to identify her, then sexually exploited through the voice of the narrator. As I've studied this text, I've watched many male-authored commentaries gloss over the abuse and rape in this text and blame Bathsheba for her beauty. And if you remember when Samuel was distraught, and we talked about Samuel when he was distraught about Israel wanting a king, right? To rule over them and to lead them into battle, he knew a king would take certain privileges with the people. And he told them that a king would take their daughters as perfumers, as cooks and bakers. But what Samuel never lifted up from his mouth was that a king would send for your wives and rape your daughters. What Samuel knew was that whenever a power dynamic is present, there is room for abuse and oppression to happen when it is not properly checked. I want to say that again. Whenever you find a power dynamic at play, there is room for abuse and oppression if not properly checked, okay? So that's how we find many times through the system of patriarchy, right? That privileges men over women. That is already a power dynamic at play, and that is how we find things such as domestic violence and violence against women are often swept under the rug or just said that's a part of being in the system. But the gospel of Jesus is about liberation and wholeness and calling out the oppressor. And I can tell this morning some of you are struggling with my use of the word rape attributed to a king. The words rape attributed to someone in leadership. The words rape attributed to someone who leads a nation and wins battles. But isn't that what Thomas Jefferson did with his black slave, Sally Hemings? Oh my God, come on. They tried to rewrite history and say that Hemings was his lover. Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder. He was a slave master, and he built quarters in his own space so that he could sleep with and dominate Sally whenever he wanted to. That is not about love. Rape is not about love. Domination of women or men is not about love, or children or boys and girls. It's not about love. It is not about being in love. That is about power and control over property. Sally Hemings endured a level of rape and power dynamics that many of us could never fathom or conceive what it meant to live within the quarters of somebody and bear their children. He is your slave master, even if you uttered no, you were property. How can one reconcile being one of the primary authors of the Declaration of Independence? The juxtaposition between all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, such as happiness, pursuit of happiness, liberty. How can you reconcile that to raping the slave in your house? Or we try to rewrite history and make the story of David and Bathsheba a beautiful one. But the woman had no voice in the text. When women are placed in positions where they have no voice, or raised in a society or in a church where they have no agency, even if uttered, their no's do not matter. Anytime you're in a position where you can't say no, it is rape. I want to help us understand that we have a hard time. We would try to rewrite little girls' stories. Well, did you say no? If a person is in a position where they cannot say no, it is rape. Call a spade, and so many of us in the church have looked over little girls and little boys who called out their offender, and they've been silenced. Because why do they silence? See, often it's not just putting tape over their mouth. The perpetrator finds ways through power dynamics to silence victims. Why? Because if you're silent, you cannot tell what was done to you and who did it. So I wanted to just stand here today. God literally, I have to make sure you understand that I didn't just pick this text. God literally chose the timing of this text, of this message, because it's one you just don't go down, you don't lay down and go to sleep at night as a pastor knowing you about to get up and say that David was a rapist. Some churches you'll get thrown out because you have called out somebody that we love to trace his lineage, but hey, we want to talk about Rahab the prostitute. Let's talk about David the rapist, because that's what he was. How many times as a little girl that you hear this message preached over and over again, and nobody ever gives the context of the story? Nobody ever points out that Bathsheba doesn't have a voice, and that it's a male narrator telling the story, and men are the ones who basically interpreted the Bible and gave us the King James Version. Help us now. So how patriarchy has been passed down through our religion, and so you get to back up and say, that story don't make sense. That story does not make sense. Why does Bathsheba not have a voice? Except for just saying that I am pregnant after the deed has been done to her, after her life has been redirected because of some man's power dynamic. Then she gets to say, I am pregnant. So I challenge this morning all the male-authored Bible commentaries that gloss over the hard questions and cannot set with attention in this text. I challenge all the men who I've heard preach this text as a little girl who lifted up Bathsheba as some type of seductress and never named David's sin. They start naming David's sin when they get to Uriah, but I can stop at verse 5 and tell you David had already sinned when he committed sexual violence against this woman. Bathsheba this morning is a victim of a monarchy that takes and kills and blames and hides its hands.